Before we begin, if you've ever poured your heart and soul into a project only to have someone else sign their name to it, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. It helps to know I'm not screaming into the void. My name is Eloise. For 3 years, I was a junior architect at Croft and Sterling, which really just meant I was an architect at the firm of Julian Croft. The Sterling partner had been dead for a decade, but Julian kept the name. He said it added a sense of history, of gravitas. In reality, it was just another prop for the grand stage play of his life. Julian Croft wasn't just an architect, he was a brand. His face, all sharp angles and theatrical silver hair, was on the cover of every trade magazine. He cultivated an image of the rebellious genius, the artist who just happened to build skyscrapers. He called his style brutal elegance, and the critics adored him for it. To work for him was supposed to be the dream. It was the architectural equivalent of getting into Harvard. You took the job, you endured the legendary hazing, and you emerged 3 to 5 years later with his name on your resume like a battle scar you could show off for the rest of your career. The hazing, of course, was Julian himself. He had this way of making the most wildly inappropriate comments, usually to the women on his team, and then dismissing any discomfort with a wave of his hand and a booming laugh. He'd call it his old-school charm. He'd walk by my desk, look at a complex structural diagram I'd been working on for a week, and say, "Don't worry your pretty little head about the load-bearing calculations, sweetheart. Just make the lines look sexy." Then he'd wink, and the junior male architects would snicker into their fists, half out of fear, half out of a desperate desire to be included in his orbit. That was the currency of the firm, proximity to Julian's blinding, toxic star. The project that changed everything was the Serenity Pavilion. On paper, it was the kind of project architects kill for. It wasn't a corporate headquarters or a billionaire's glass box overlooking the park. It was a community and rehabilitation center for disabled veterans and their families. It was a chance to do something that mattered, something with a soul. It was funded by a consortium of veterans advocacy groups who had raised the money dollar by painful dollar over 15 years. The project was meant to be the crown jewel of Julian's career, the one that would finally pivot him from famous architect to humanitarian. Specifically, he was gunning for the Pritzker Humanitarian Design Award, the industry's equivalent of a Nobel Peace Prize. He talked about it constantly. Every design choice, every material selection was filtered through the lens of how it would look in the award submission packet. We worked for 18 months. I lived in that office. My diet consisted of stale coffee and the vending machine's saddest-looking protein bars. I poured everything I had into that project. I was the lead on the accessibility integration. I designed the ramp systems to feel not like afterthoughts, but like elegant, flowing pathways. I designed the sensory rooms for veterans with PTSD. I specified the exact grade of non-slip flooring and the precise Kelvin temperature of the lighting to avoid triggering anxiety. I knew this design inside and out. It was more my building than it was his. The end was a blur of sleepless nights, leading up to the final design review with Julian before the submission. The meeting was, of course, over Zoom. Julian was at his sprawling Connecticut estate, a glass of what looked like very expensive scotch, sitting just in frame. The rest of us, the worker bees, were in our little apartment boxes on the screen. He was in a celebratory mood, which was always a warning sign. It meant his internal filter was completely gone. He started the meeting by slurring a toast to himself. Then he started clicking through the final presentation slides I had personally stayed up 72 hours to finish. He got to the slide on the main entrance. The centerpiece was a long, gracefully curved ramp that ran parallel to a grand staircase. It was beautiful, functional, and integral to the design. Julian stared at it for a moment, his eyes slightly unfocused. Then he laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. He said, "You know, the boys in accounting are having a fit over this ramp. All this reinforced steel, the gentle grading, it's gold plating, really." He looked around the virtual room, seeking adoration. He pointed a finger at the screen, at my face. "Eloise, sweetheart, you've done a beautiful job, but we're a business. We can value engineer this. We'll use a cheaper composite, steepen the grade a bit past the ADA minimums. Who's going to bring a protractor? We'll make it up in the landscaping budget. It's all about the photo, kids. It just needs to look good for the award." A cold silence fell over the Zoom call. I could feel the oxygen leave my tiny apartment. I looked at the other faces in their little boxes. My colleague Sarah looked like she'd been slapped. The junior men were staring intently at their own navels, pretending they hadn't heard. Julian, oblivious, took a long swallow of his scotch. He was drunk, not just tipsy, but sloppy, carelessly drunk, and in that drunken stupor, he was admitting, on a recorded call, to intentionally cutting corners on the single most important feature of a building designed for disabled veterans, to save a little money, to make the numbers look better. He wasn't done. He looked at Sarah's box on the screen and said, "Sarah, you look so serious. Don't you worry. We'll still win the award. Your name will be on it, somewhere down in the fine print. Isn't that what you girls want? A little credit?" He chuckled again, a self-satisfied rumble. Something inside me didn't just break. It turned to ice. It was a moment of absolute, horrifying clarity. All the little cuts, the daily indignities, the stolen ideas, they were just paper cuts. This was a gaping wound. This wasn't old-school charm. This was fraud. It was a profound act of disrespect, not just to me, but to the very people the building was meant to serve. He submitted the project for the Humanitarian Design Award the next morning. His office sent out a gloating internal memo with a picture of Julian looking noble against a backdrop of the building's rendering. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that our firm, in its infinite wisdom, automatically recorded all major Zoom meetings for archival purposes. And what he really didn't know was that I, the quiet junior architect he called Sweetheart, had just anonymously sent the award committee a link to the full, unedited video file. I wrote a simple 3-line email. I told them who I was not. I told them to pay very close attention starting at the 45-minute mark. And then, with a click that felt as loud as a gunshot in my silent apartment, I hit send. It was over. Or maybe it was just beginning. The silence after I hit send was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. My heart was a hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I stared at the screen, at the message sent confirmation, a simple black and white declaration of war. My apartment, which had felt like a sanctuary just minutes before, now felt like a command bunker, the air thick with ozone and the smell of a lightning strike that had just hit too close. I got up from my cheap IKEA desk and walked to the window, looking down at the anonymous city lights below. Each light was a life, a story. How many of them were like me, sitting in the quiet hum of their own betrayal? My first instinct wasn't celebration. It wasn't even relief. It was a profound, hollow emptiness. The rage that had been a white-hot furnace in my chest during Julian's drunken monologue had cooled into something far more dangerous, a solid block of ice. I thought I would cry. I had expected a torrent of tears, a breakdown born of 3 years of accumulated frustration and humiliation, but nothing came. It was as if my body had decided that tears were a luxury I couldn't afford, an expenditure of energy that needed to be conserved for what was coming. The battle was initiated, but the war was far from over. I sank onto my sofa, the fabric cool against my skin. The city lights blurred, and the memories started. Not as a flood, but as a series of sharp, painful vignettes, the ghosts of 1,000 compromises. It wasn't about revenge. I had to keep telling myself that, repeating it like a mantra. It was about principle. But was that true? If I was being honest with myself, in the crushing silence of that room, a part of me was humming with a dark, satisfying energy. The logic of my actions felt debatable, even to me. Why hadn't I just quit? Why endure years of this? Was it loyalty, ambition, or was it a form of cowardice, a fear of starting over, of being blacklisted by the great Julian Croft? The answer was yes, all of it. My mind drifted back to my first year. I was 25, brimming with a naive, textbook-driven optimism. I'd won a student award for a concept I'd developed for kinetic facades, building skins that could adapt to sunlight and temperature, reducing energy consumption by almost 40%. Julian had seen it in a journal, and that's why he'd hired me. He'd brought me into his cavernous, minimalist office, all concrete and black leather, and told me, "You have vision, Eloise. I can shape that vision. I can make you great." I believed him. I saw him not as a boss, but as a mentor, a modern-day master with an apprentice. My first major assignment was a corporate tower in Dubai. I spent a month sleeping in the office, modeling a version of my kinetic facade for the desert climate. It was my baby. I solved the complex engineering problems, the material sourcing, the wind load calculations. I presented it to Julian in a private review. He was silent for a long time, circling the physical model I'd painstakingly built. He touched the delicate, interlocking panels with a single finger. Brilliant, he'd whispered. Absolutely brilliant. The next day, in the big meeting with the clients, he presented my work. He stood before the screen, my diagrams and renderings projected behind him, and he said, "I had a flash of inspiration last night. I did a few rough sketches, and my team here helped me flesh them out." He held up a piece of tracing paper with a few crude, vague lines on it, a theatrical prop to sell the lie. He took all the credit. Every last ounce of it. I sat in the back of the room, my knuckles white on the edge of my chair, and I said nothing. I felt a quiet heat flush up my neck. The other senior architects, the men who'd been there for years, just nodded along. This was the price of admission. This was how the game was played. I told myself it was for the good of the firm, that my time would come. Then there was the constant, low-grade hum of his old-school charm. It was a form of psychological warfare disguised as affection. He never called me Eloise. It was sweetheart, kiddo, darling. When I successfully navigated a complex zoning variance that saved a project, he patted me on the back, his hand lingering just a little too long, and said, "See, I knew you had it in you. You just needed a man to point you in the right direction." He'd say these things in front of everyone, a public assertion of his dominance and my subservience. Each comment was a tiny chisel, chipping away at my professional identity, trying to carve me into the shape he wanted, a talented but ultimately non-threatening subordinate. Sarah, who was a brilliant project manager, was constantly subjected to comments about her organizational skills being a natural female trait, as if she were tidying a closet instead of coordinating a $50 million construction schedule. We'd catch each other's eyes in the aftermath of these comments, a silent, shared acknowledgement of the poison in the air. We never spoke about it directly. To do so would be to give it more power, to admit that it was working. This is why I stayed. It's the part that's hard to explain to people on the outside. Leaving felt like letting him win. It felt like admitting that I couldn't handle it, that his charm had successfully chased me away. So I stayed, telling myself it was a strategic endurance test. I would outlast him. I would become so undeniably good, so essential, that he would have no choice but to see me as an equal. It was a fool's errand. Narcissists don't have equals. They only have audiences and tools. For 3 years, I had been a very, very useful tool. The biggest lie, the one that truly formed the bedrock of my resentment, was the mentorship. He'd dangle it in front of me like a carrot. After a successful client presentation, one where he'd present my work as his, he'd pull me aside. "Eloise, your contribution was noted. Stick with me, and in a few years you'll be running a department. We'll get you licensed. We'll make you a partner." He was selling me a future that he was actively sabotaging in the present. He needed my work, but he couldn't stomach the idea of my ambition. An ambitious woman was a threat to the carefully constructed narrative of his singular genius. The memory that truly solidified my resolve that night, the one that fused all the disparate pieces of anger into a coherent weapon, wasn't from the office. It was from my childhood. My grandfather, Arthur, was a carpenter. He built beautiful, sturdy things with his hands. He smelled of sawdust and quiet confidence. He served in the army, a mechanic who kept the engines running. A training accident in his late 50s crushed his legs, and he spent the last 15 years of his life in a wheelchair. He never complained, but I saw the daily war he fought with a world that wasn't built for him. I saw the frustration in his eyes when a shop had a single step at its entrance, an insurmountable wall. I saw the way he had to plan every trip, every outing, like a military campaign, calling ahead to ask about ramps, about bathroom stalls, about the width of doorways. He once told me, "Eloise, the world is full of lazy designers, people who only build for themselves. A good design, a truly good one, doesn't exclude anyone. It opens a door. It doesn't build a wall." He gave me his old set of drafting pencils before he passed away. They were heavy, German-made, the wood worn smooth by his fingers. I kept them on my desk. They were a talisman, a reminder of what good design was supposed to be about. And as I sat there in the dark, I thought of my grandfather. I thought of him trying to navigate the value-engineered ramp that Julian had joked about. A ramp with a grade too steep, made of a cheaper material that would become slick in the rain. I pictured his wheelchair slipping, his knuckles straining as he tried to pull himself up. The image was so vivid, so visceral, that it made me physically sick. A quiet rage, cold and pure, washed over me. This wasn't about my stolen credit anymore. It wasn't about being called sweetheart. It was about my grandfather. It was about every single veteran who would be betrayed by that building, a place that promised them serenity and delivered a slap in the face. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. A humanitarian design award for a building that was fundamentally inhumane. That was the catalyst. That was the moment the ice in my chest became a diamond. I stood up and walked back to my computer. The plan had been an act of impulsive justice. Now it had to become a strategy. It had to be flawless. It was no longer enough to just expose Julian. I had to ensure the building was built correctly. I had to protect the design's soul. I remembered something. A few months back, when the budget cuts first started being discussed, I had a sick feeling. On my own time, late at night, fueled by a paranoid foresight, I had started working on a parallel design, a secret project. I took Julian's demand for value engineering as a challenge. I spent weeks researching new materials, innovative construction techniques. I redesigned the ramp system using a lightweight, high-tensile steel alloy that was stronger and required less structural support, offsetting its higher material cost with lower labor and concrete costs. I redesigned the lifts to use a new, more compact hydraulic system that was cheaper to install and more energy efficient. I found a way to save the firm even more money than Julian's corner cutting would have, while improving the accessibility features, not compromising them. I had the full set of blueprints saved on a personal, encrypted hard drive. I had named the folder Arthur's Plan. At the time, I thought I was doing it to prove to Julian that I was better than he thought. I imagined a scene where I would present it to him, and he would finally see my brilliance. Now I saw it for what it truly was. It wasn't a plea for recognition. It was a life raft. It was leverage. The video I sent would burn the old structure down. But these blueprints were the foundation for something new. I wasn't just a whistleblower anymore. I was an architect with a better plan. The rage was gone, replaced by a crystalline, calm focus. The objective was clear. It wasn't about revenge. It was about building the Serenity Pavilion, the right way, and I would tear down Julian Croft's entire world to do it. A plan born from anger is a fire. It burns hot and fast, but it consumes itself and dies, leaving nothing but ash. A plan born from cold, clear-eyed purpose is a glacier. It moves slowly, silently, but it carves mountains and changes the shape of the world. As the first hint of dawn began to gray the edges of the city, my anger had fully transformed into ice. The emotional storm had passed, and what remained was a landscape of quiet, calculated strategy. This was not going to be a messy, emotional confrontation. It was going to be a quiet coup, an act of architectural and professional demolition executed with the precision of a blueprint. My first thought was security. The email was sent from a disposable, encrypted address through a series of VPNs, untraceable. The video file was hosted on a service that would purge it after a single download, leaving no trail back to me. But the real vulnerability wasn't digital, it was human. Julian, when cornered, would not look for a ghost in the machine. He would look for a traitor in the ranks. I needed to ensure I was invisible. This foresight wasn't new. It was a survival mechanism I had developed over 3 years of working for a man who thrived on chaos. I learned to document everything, not in an organized, I'm building a legal case kind of way, but in a scattered, almost subconscious manner. I saved drafts of emails with his contradictory instructions. I kept a private journal with dated entries of his comments, his broken promises. I had an external hard drive, the one with Arthur's Plan on it, that never once touched the firm's network. It was my professional black box, the complete record of my journey through the wreckage of Julian's ego. The key to it all, the piece of foresight that now seemed like a prophecy, was my access. About a year ago, Julian's long-suffering executive assistant, a woman in her late 60s named Carol, had been struggling with the new cloud storage system. Julian would scream at her for not being able to find a file he'd saved in some random, mislabeled folder. In a moment of desperation, she had asked me for help. I was the youngest on the team, and therefore the designated tech person. I spent a weekend reorganizing the entire digital archive, creating a logical system of folders and permissions. As a thank you, and to save herself future headaches, Carol had given me blanket administrative credentials. Just in case Julian has another meltdown, she'd sighed, it's easier if you can just fix it. Neither of us understood the power she had just handed me. It was a skeleton key to the entire kingdom. It's how I was able to so easily find and download the Zoom recording. It was a colossal failure of corporate security, born from one man's laziness and another man's temper, a perfectly plausible inaccuracy in the real world, but in Julian's world of performative genius, it made perfect sense. He didn't care about the details, only the results. Now, I needed allies. A solitary soldier can't win a war. I thought of Sarah. I'd seen her face on that Zoom call. I saw the flash of outrage before she suppressed it, her features smoothing back into a mask of professional neutrality. She was sharp, principled, and had been at the firm a year longer than I had. She had endured more of Julian's charm than anyone. She was a potential co-conspirator, but I couldn't just walk up to her and say, I just torpedoed our boss's career, you in? I had to be careful. I waited until the next day at the office. The atmosphere was normal, which was almost more chilling. Julian was probably still nursing his Scotch-induced hangover in Connecticut, oblivious. I found Sarah at the coffee machine, the hiss of the steamer covering our words. I kept my voice low, casual. That was some meeting yesterday. She didn't look at me. She just focused on pouring the milk into her cup. Julian was in rare form. Her voice was tight. His comments about the ramp, I let the sentence hang in the air. It didn't feel right. For this project, I was watching her hands. Her knuckles were white around her mug. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were dark. It was disgusting, Eloise. She said it in a whisper, but the word had the force of a shout. To say that about a place for them, for veterans. It was just ugly. That was all I needed. I didn't push further. I just nodded. Yeah, ugly. A silent pact was formed in that moment, an alliance forged in shared disgust. I knew, without saying another word, that if things went sideways, she wouldn't be the one to rat me out. She was on my side of the board. My second ally was more of a ghost, Marcus. He was the firm's head drafter, a man who had been with Croft & Sterling since before I was born. He was quiet, meticulous, and had seen a dozen young architects like me come and go. He operated an ancient-looking drafting table in a forgotten corner of the office, preferring paper and pencil to the slick CAD software everyone else used. Julian treated him like a piece of furniture, a relic who was useful for his technical precision but unworthy of attention. But Marcus saw everything. He was the firm's institutional memory. I approached him not with complaints, but with a question about Arthur's plan. I brought him a printout of my alternate ramp design. Marcus, I said, I'm exploring a concept for a personal project. I'm trying to reduce the concrete pour without compromising the tensile strength. What do you think of this alloy? He took the blueprint from me, his gnarled fingers tracing the lines I had drawn. He was silent for a full minute, his eyes scanning the technical specifications. He looked up at me, over the top of his reading glasses, a flicker of something I'd never seen from him before. Respect was in his eyes. This is not a personal project, Eloise, he said, his voice a low rumble. This is the Serenity Pavilion, the way it should have been designed. My blood ran cold. I don't know what you mean. He smiled. A rare, sad thing. I've been here for 30 years. I know Julian's tricks. I know he talks about budget, but it's always about ego. He'll take a perfectly good design and break it, just so he can say he fixed it. He tapped the blueprint. This is elegant, it's smarter, it's better. And he'll never approve it, because it wasn't his idea. He handed it back to me. Whatever you're planning to do with this, be careful. He's a peacock, but a cornered peacock is still a dangerous bird. Marcus had given me two things: validation for my design and a crucial piece of intel. He had confirmed my assessment of Julian's character. And by not asking any more questions, he had signaled his allegiance. He would be my eyes and ears inside the firm, the quiet observer in the corner who would see the first ripples of the coming storm. The final piece of my plan was the most important. The life raft had to become a destination. It wasn't enough to escape. I had to have a place to land. I remembered a lecture I'd attended a year prior, given by Amelia Vance, the founder of a small, award-winning firm called Vance Atelier. Her firm was known for its focus on sustainable, community-centric projects. She was everything Julian pretended to be, a true visionary, quiet, intensely focused, and deeply respected. Her work was humane to its core. I spent hours crafting an email to her. It was the most important document I had ever written. I didn't mention Julian. I didn't mention the video. I framed it as a young architect seeking a new path. I attached my portfolio, but not the work I did for Julian. I attached my personal projects, the ones from my student days, and a heavily redacted, non-identifiable version of Arthur's plan, presented simply as a conceptual study in universal design. I wrote, "Dear Miss Vance, my name is Eloise. I have long admired your firm's commitment to architecture that serves rather than imposes. I am currently at a point in my career where I feel a profound need to align my work with my principles. I believe that a building's greatest value is not in its aesthetic statement, but in its silent daily service to the people who use it. If you have any openings for a junior architect who is passionate about building a better, more inclusive world, I would be honored to speak with you." I read it over a dozen times. It was honest. It was professional. And it was a Hail Mary. I hit send, my second fateful click in as many days. Now all the pieces were in place. The weapon was delivered. The allies were primed. The escape route was mapped out. I had built a parachute in secret, stitching it together with late-night work, paranoid documentation, and the memory of my grandfather. It was a strange feeling, coming into the office every day, sitting at my desk, and making small talk with people whose world was about to be turned upside down. I would see Julian stride through the office on the days he bothered to show up, radiating his usual smug, unearned confidence. He'd throw a "How's it going, darling?" my way, and I'd give him a small, polite smile and a "Fine, Julian." The silence was my shield. The noise was all his. He was playing checkers, moving his pieces around with loud, theatrical slams. I was playing chess, and I had just quietly placed his king in check. He just didn't know it yet. It was never about revenge. It was about the integrity of the board. And Julian Croft had been playing a crooked game for far too long. The waiting was a unique form of torment. It was a silent, internal scream. Every day, I'd walk into the office, the air thick with a normality that felt like a lie. I'd sit at my desk, my screen filled with CAD drawings and spreadsheets, while my mind was running 1,000 different scenarios. What if the committee just deleted the email? What if they thought it was a prank? What if they told Julian? My calm, strategic resolve was a thin sheet of ice over a raging sea of anxiety. I had to force myself to breathe, to focus on the mundane tasks of my job, to perform the role of Eloise, the diligent, quiet junior architect. It was the performance of a lifetime. The silence from the Pritzker committee stretched from days into a week, then 2. The firm was buzzing with excitement about the submission. Julian was more insufferable than ever, walking around like he'd already won, accepting congratulations for a victory that hadn't happened. He was basking in the glow of his own fabricated humanitarianism. He held a champagne toast in the main conference room. He raised a glass to the Serenity Pavilion, a testament to what we can achieve when we blend compassion with concrete. I stood in the back, holding my glass of cheap sparkling wine, the irony so thick I could taste it. I made eye contact with Sarah across the room. She gave me a barely perceptible shake of her head, a shared signal of our disgust. Then, 3 weeks after I sent the email, the first tremor hit. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, almost invisible signal that only I would recognize. I received a one-line email from Amelia Vance. It said, "Dear Eloise, your portfolio is compelling. I will be in the city next week. Would you be free for a coffee? Amelia." My heart didn't leap. It just settled. The first plank of my life raft had just been nailed into place. It was a possibility, a door creaking open in the wall of my prison. I wrote back, a calm, professional acceptance. The first thread of a new future had been spun. The real earthquake began 2 days later. It started, as I knew it would, with Marcus. I was at my desk, trying to refine a detail on a different project, when a chat notification popped up on my screen. It was from him. The message was just 3 words: "The turtles are restless." It was a code we had developed, a nonsense phrase from an old joke he'd told me that meant, "Julian is panicking." My head snapped up. I scanned the office. Everything looked normal, but Marcus was never wrong. I typed back, "Details?" Closed-door meeting. Julian, the other 2 equity partners, and legal. Voices were raised. Julian's face was purple when he came out. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. The video had landed. The committee hadn't ignored it. They were making their move. The quiet machinery of justice was beginning to turn. An hour later, the evidence became public. A company-wide email landed in my inbox. The subject line was "Urgent, Serenity Pavilion Documentation." It was from one of the other partners, a dry, serious man named Robert. The email was a frantic request for the full, unredacted project archive, including all meeting minutes, budget revisions, and material specification sheets to be compiled and delivered to the partner's office by the end of the day. It was phrased as a routine internal audit, but the tone of stark terror was unmistakable. They were scrambling. Someone somewhere had asked a question they couldn't answer. The office atmosphere shifted instantly. The celebratory buzz evaporated, replaced by a tense, nervous energy. People were whispering in corners, their faces etched with confusion and worry. Julian stormed out of his office, his face a mask of thunder. He wasn't charming anymore. He was cornered. He saw me at my desk and marched over. "Eloise," he barked, his voice tight with fury. "The pavilion. I need the full spec history on the ADA ramps. Now." I looked up at him, my expression carefully neutral. "Of course, Julian. Is there a problem?" "Just get me the files," he snapped, before turning and stalking back to his office, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent workspace. This was the noise I had anticipated. The chaos, the blame, the panic. While they were scrambling, tearing the office apart, looking for a paper trail to cover their tracks, I was calm. I had the truth saved on an encrypted drive in my apartment. I knew what the files would show. They would show my original, compliant, and elegant designs, followed by a series of revision orders from Julian's office, each one chipping away at the quality, replacing specified materials with cheaper alternatives, all signed off with his digital signature. He was looking for a scapegoat, and all the evidence would point directly back to him. The public reveal came a week later, and it was more devastating than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't a formal disqualification from the Pritzker Committee. That would have been too clean, too private. Instead, a well-known and highly respected architectural critic, a woman named Anja Sharma, who was famous for her biting commentary on industry ethics, published a column online. The title was "The Soulless Serenity, When Humanitarian Design is Neither." The article was a masterpiece of professional destruction. It never mentioned a video. It never named an anonymous source. It was all based on conversations with sources close to the Pritzker selection process. Anja wrote about troubling questions being raised about the Serenity Pavilion's core design principles. She used phrases like a potential disconnect between the project's marketing and its material reality. She specifically honed in on the accessibility features, questioning the aggressive value engineering applied to elements critical for the building's intended users. She wrote, "A building that offers a beautiful photograph but a treacherous experience for a person in a wheelchair is not humanitarian. It is a monument to the architect's ego." She was quoting Julian's own words back to him without knowing it. The article spread through the architectural community like a wildfire. It was on Twitter, on LinkedIn, in every architect's inbox. Julian Croft, the humanitarian, was being publicly and systematically dismantled by one of the most powerful voices in his own field. He was being accused of the one sin his brand could not tolerate, being a phony. The panic at the firm went nuclear. The phone started ringing. Clients, journalists, board members of the Veterans Group. Julian locked himself in his office and refused to talk to anyone. The other partners were in a state of frantic damage control, but there was nothing to control. The damage was done. The story wasn't about a rumor anymore. It was about the public perception of the firm's integrity, and it was in free fall. I watched it all unfold from my quiet desk. I forwarded every new link, every scathing tweet to my personal email, adding it to my collection. Sarah would walk by my desk, and we'd share a look, No words were necessary. Marcus sent me another chat message. It just said, checkmate. But I knew it wasn't checkmate yet. A king is not truly defeated until he is removed from the board. Julian was wounded, humiliated, but he still held power. The final phase of the plan, the actual takeover, had yet to begin. I had to do more than just expose the rot. I had to be the one to offer the cure. The next day, I had coffee with Amelia Vance. It was time to show her Arthur's plan. The silent takedown was entering its final, critical stage. The coffee shop was a small, quiet place, a world away from the frantic, high-gloss chaos of Julian's firm. Amelia Vance was exactly as I had pictured her, calm, intelligent, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. There was no small talk. After we ordered, she looked at me directly and said, "Your portfolio is impressive, Eloise. The conceptual study on universal design. It's more than a study. It's a fully realized, buildable solution. Where did it come from?" The moment of truth. I took a breath. It was an alternative design proposal for a project I'd been working on, the Serenity Pavilion. A flicker of recognition in her eyes. She'd read the article. Of course she had. The Julian Croft project. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. The official design was compromised. I believed there was a better way to achieve the project's goals, both ethically and financially. So I developed one on my own time. I didn't need to show her the video. I didn't need to talk about Julian's drunken rant. All I had to do was walk her through Arthur's plan. I pulled out my tablet and showed her the blueprints, the material cost-benefit analysis, the side-by-side comparison of my design versus Julian's value-engineered version. I spoke quietly, sticking to the facts, to the numbers, to the architectural principles. I was no longer a junior architect pleading for a job. I was a professional, presenting a superior solution. Amelia listened, her eyes moving across the screen, absorbing every detail. When I was finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "This is brilliant, not just good. Brilliant. Why isn't this the design they're building?" "Because it wasn't his idea," I said, echoing Marcus's words. She nodded slowly, a sad understanding on her face. "Julian Croft," she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "He casts a long shadow." She looked at me, a new intensity in her gaze. "Eloise, I don't have an opening for a junior architect, but I think I might have one for a project lead." The ground shifted under my feet. It was happening. The life raft wasn't just a raft anymore. It was a flagship, and someone was handing me the helm. The power shift back at the firm was swift and brutal. The Anja Sharma article was the catalyst, but the client for the Serenity Pavilion, the Veterans Advocacy Group, was the executioner. They were a serious, no-nonsense organization led by a retired four-star general. They were not interested in optics or brand management. They were interested in a safe, functional, and respectful home for their people. The article had shaken their faith. They called an emergency meeting. Julian was legally obligated to attend. Marcus later told me the story, which he'd gotten from Robert, the partner who was now in full-blown panic mode. The general didn't raise his voice. He simply sat at the head of the conference table, the damning article printed out in front of him, and asked Julian one question. "Mr. Croft, is there any truth to the allegation that you compromised the safety and accessibility of this facility to save money?" Julian, according to the story, blustered. He tried his old-school charm. He talked about the complex realities of modern construction budgets and artistic license. He tried to deflect, to confuse, to charm his way out of the corner he was in. The general cut him off. "That's a yes or no question, son." Julian froze. He couldn't admit to it, and he could no longer convincingly deny it. His silence was the answer. The Veterans Group put the project on indefinite hold, pending a full, independent structural and ethical review. The funding was frozen. It was a kill shot. The firm's crown jewel project was now a toxic asset, a public monument to their own failure. The news sent a shockwave through the firm's other clients. No one wants to be associated with a sinking ship, especially one sinking due to ethical breaches. Quietly at first, then more openly, the calls started coming in. A major tech client put a planned expansion on hold. A luxury hotel group requested a full review of their ongoing project. The exodus had begun. Clients weren't leaving because I was poaching them. They were fleeing a reputational fire that Julian himself had set. This was when Julian's panic curdled into outright paranoia. He knew it was an inside job. He couldn't prove it, but he knew. His charm was gone, replaced by a raw, snarling aggression. He started a witch hunt, interrogating staff, demanding to see email histories, creating an atmosphere of pure poison and fear. And then he made his final, fatal mistake. He thought he could buy me. He cornered me in the hallway, away from any witnesses. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. He tried to force a smile, a grotesque parody of his old charisma. "Eloise," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "We're in a bit of a jam here. A misunderstanding. You know how these things get blown out of proportion?" I just looked at him, saying nothing. "You're the best I've got, you know," he continued, his voice slick with false sincerity. "You know this project better than anyone. I'm prepared to offer you a senior project architect position, a 30% raise. We'll put your name on the door right next to mine. Just help me fix this. Help me spin this. We can say the media got it wrong, that these were just early concepts." It was a stunning display of narcissistic audacity. After everything, he still saw me as a tool, a thing he could pick up and use to fix the problem he had created. He was offering me the very thing I once thought I wanted, the promotion, the recognition, but it was tainted, offered not as a reward for my merit, but as a bribe for my silence. It was a logically insane move, born from the desperate belief that everyone, like him, had a price. That was his debatable character logic. His ego wouldn't allow him to believe someone could operate on a different value system. I let the silence stretch out, enjoying the way his desperation grew in the quiet space between us. I thought about all the late nights, all the stolen credit, all the casual, soul-crushing dismissals. I thought about my grandfather. I looked him right in the eye. My voice was calm, quiet, and perfectly clear. "No, thank you, Julian." His face contorted in disbelief. "No? What do you mean, no? This is the opportunity of a lifetime." "I don't think so," I said. And then I delivered the final quiet blow. I used his own words, the ones that had started this all, as a weapon. "I think my pretty little head is probably better suited to a firm that doesn't see accessibility as gold plating." The color drained from his face. It was a direct hit. In that moment, he knew. He didn't know how I'd done it, but he knew who had. He saw the quiet, diligent junior architect he'd dismissed for 3 years, and for the first time, he saw the person who had dismantled his entire world. He opened his mouth to say something, to threaten or to plead, but no sound came out. He just stared at me, his empire crumbling around him in the silent hallway. I didn't wait for a response. I just turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, a ghost in his own firm. I went back to my desk, typed up my 2 weeks' notice, and emailed it to HR and the partners. An hour later, an email from Sarah landed in my inbox. It was a forward of her own resignation letter. The subject line was just one word: solidarity. The power shift was complete. He had lost his project, he was losing his clients, and now he had lost his team. The noise was finally dying down, replaced by the profound silence of his defeat. My final 2 weeks at Croft & Sterling were like walking through a city after a hurricane. The usual thrum of activity was gone, replaced by a stunned, hollow silence. People moved through the hallways like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, speaking in hushed tones. Julian was conspicuously absent, reportedly working from home, which everyone knew was corporate speak for hiding in disgrace. The remaining partners, Robert and the other one, were in a state of perpetual, frantic damage control, but they were trying to patch a dam with chewing gum. The breach was too big. The firm was taking on water fast. My last day was a Friday. I packed my few personal belongings into a cardboard box, a coffee mug, a picture frame, and my grandfather's old drafting pencils. As I was about to leave, Marcus walked over to my desk. He didn't say much. He just placed a hand on my shoulder, a rare gesture of physical contact from him. Arthur would be proud, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He'd overheard me talking about my grandfather once. He'd remembered. It meant more to me than any promotion Julian could have ever offered. I nodded, unable to speak, and walked out of that office for the last time without looking back. The confrontation I expected never came. There were no dramatic showdowns, no legal threats. Julian's countermove was simply to vanish, to retreat into the shell of his own shattered ego. But the real vindication came about a month later. It arrived in the form of a phone call. It was General Miller, the head of the Veterans Advocacy Group. "Miss Eloise," he said, his voice a calm, authoritative baritone. "I've been made aware, through a mutual acquaintance on the Pritzker Committee, that you were the true design lead on the Serenity Pavilion. I was also made aware that you developed an alternative proposal, one that honors the spirit of the project." My heart hammered in my chest. Amelia Vance had made a call. She hadn't just given me a job. She had given me a chance at redemption. "That's correct, General," I said, my voice steady. "My board and I have officially terminated our contract with Croft and Sterling," he said. "The project is now open for a new architectural partner. We would be honored if you and your new firm would submit a proposal, your proposal to be exact." It wasn't a question. It was an invitation, a coronation. And so the new reality began. I started at Vance Atelier, not as a junior, but as the project lead for the Serenity Pavilion. Amelia gave me a small team, full autonomy, and her unwavering trust. The first person I hired was Sarah. She accepted the job before I even finished the sentence. Our new office was nothing like Julian's cold, minimalist palace. It was bright, open, filled with plants and collaborative energy. It was a place where ideas were celebrated, not stolen. The news of Julian's final, pathetic fate came from an industry press release. It announced his immediate retirement to pursue personal projects, a classic corporate euphemism for being forced out in disgrace. The firm, Croft and Sterling, was acquired for pennies on the dollar by a larger, faceless conglomerate a few months later. Robert and the other partners, who had enabled Julian's behavior for years, were swept out in the transition. The entire rotten structure had collapsed in on itself, a consequence not of my direct attack, but of its own hollow foundation. I had simply held up a mirror, and the monster had destroyed itself. 6 months later, I was standing on a muddy construction site under a brilliant blue sky. It was the groundbreaking ceremony for the Serenity Pavilion, the real one, my design, Arthur's plan. I was standing at a podium, looking out at a crowd of veterans, their families, and the members of the advocacy group. General Miller was beside me. Amelia Vance was in the front row, smiling. I delivered a short speech. I didn't mention Julian. I didn't mention the old firm. I talked about architecture as an act of service. I talked about my grandfather. I talked about building doorways instead of walls. When I was done, General Miller handed me a silver ceremonial shovel. As I pushed it into the earth, the feeling wasn't one of triumph or revenge. It was a feeling of profound, quiet rightness. It was the feeling of a promise kept. My new office overlooks the city, but from a different angle. It's smaller, but the light is better. On my desk, next to my computer, sits my grandfather's set of drafting pencils. They are a constant reminder. Some people might look at what I did and call it revenge. And maybe a part of it was. I'm human. But as I stand here today, watching the steel frame of the pavilion rise against the skyline, I know it was never really about Julian. It wasn't about getting even. It was about the design. It was about the integrity of the lines on the page and the purpose they were meant to serve. It was about the quiet, unwavering belief that we have a responsibility to build a world that is worthy of the people who live in it. Julian built monuments to himself. We were building a sanctuary for others. And in the end, that is the only kind of architecture that truly lasts. So here is the moral of the story. The part where I look you, the person watching this, right in the eye. They will tell you to be patient. They will tell you to pay your dues. They will tell you that the world is just the way it is and you are too small to change it. They will steal your work, dismiss your voice, and call you sweetheart while they do it. They will build their empires on your talent and your silence. You have two choices. You can accept that reality, keep your head down, and hope that one day they will bestow upon you a fraction of the credit you deserve. Or you can become your own architect. You can draft your own plans in secret if you have to. You can build your own foundation based on your own integrity. You can find your own allies, the people who see your value even when you're forced to whisper. It's not about burning down their house in a fit of rage. It's about building your own right next door that is so much stronger, so much brighter, and so much more honest that theirs simply collapses from the shame of the comparison. It's not about revenge. It's about reclamation. You are not a supporting character in someone else's story. You are the lead architect of your own. Your name deserves to be on the blueprint. So if you have ever felt erased, overlooked, or underestimated, know this: your work matters, your voice matters, and your integrity is the most valuable thing you will ever build. Don't let anyone value engineer it. If this story meant something to you, if it resonated with a piece of your own journey, please leave a comment below. It truly helps to know that we're not in this alone. And if you want more stories about flipping the board and building your own table, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening.